Ready to go? Okay. Again, everyone, welcome to the Monday, July 4th Strategic Initiative Standing Committee. To those both in attendance and at home watching along, we have our full complement of both council and staff with us this evening, and a good agenda. So with that, I'll call the meeting to order and start with our land acknowledgement, and that is that for more than 15,000 years, the nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation. And with that said, I will read in that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for July 4, 2020 be adopted as presented. Could I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Madigan, Councillor Berman, are there any changes before I call the vote? I do know that, and I'll note, and they can speak to it when we get to it, but 6.2 under Departmental Updates, staff will be likely requesting a deferral at that point. So with that said, call the question. Those in favor? And it's carried unanimously. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, if one occurs, you know the drill. Consent agenda, item 4. We do have one item, and the council herein received the general consent agenda item. I'll put it on the table, and then if anyone wishes to pull it for comment or direction, you can do so. And the agenda item is, and further, that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are that of the authors and not verified or approved as being correct. Item 4.1, Simcoe County Annual Report Card on 10-year affordable housing and homelessness prevention strategy. Can I get a mover and seconder to put it on the table? I've got the acting deputy mayor, and I've got Councillor Doherty, and I'm calling the question to receive at this point. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Anyone wishing to pull it for question, comment, or even potentially redirection? Councillor Doherty?
Just to make the comment that now we will be looking at the county MCR and growth projections, and this affordable housing strategy with the county thus far has been a great achievement, but in my mind, I'm thinking that we will be looking at increase again in the demand in the coming years.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Given that this is a county item and that we don't have county staff present to specifically address any questions, comments, if any do arise and you'd like them addressed, please don't hesitate to pass them along, and we can forward them to either General Manager Greg Bishop or others at the county to specifically address them. Okay. That takes us to item 5, staff reports on our agenda. We do have 2, and these will be 2 items that will be tabled. They'll be opened up for public comment, seeing if there is any. And then, of course, we'll be looking for direction and approval. So the first one is item 5.1, and this is the result of a recent presentation that was given by the Accelerator, and we had given direction to staff to come back with the following. CAO 2022-10, 2022-23, contribution to the Georgian Bay Accelerator, that staff report CAO 2022-10 and 2022-23, contribution to the Georgian Bay Accelerator be received, and that council confirm a contribution of $150,000 to the Georgian Bay Accelerator for their fiscal year ending March 31, 2023, as previously included in the approved 2022 town budget. Can I get a mover and seconder to put it on the floor? I've got Councillor Jeffrey and I've got Councillor Hamlin. Thank you. My understanding is that there is no staff presentation, that this is simply a support in terms of the fact that what was presented was accurate and that you're in agreement with. A.O. Skinner?
Thank you, Chair. We don't have a presentation format. However, I was wondering if Director Valentine may have a couple of words to say about the staff assessment, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. Good evening, Director Valentine. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Happy to be here this evening with council and members of the public who are watching. I actually will pass the baton, if you're okay with that, Mr. Chair, one more time, because we do have the actual author of the report in Manager Kenny, who's prepared to provide a brief summary on his analysis.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak this evening and be in front of council and staff. So I'm going to give a brief synopsis of the report and then take any questions or comments you may have at that time. So again, thank you for the opportunity. So to remind council and to inform some members of the public as well that may be watching, in December 2020, council passed a resolution of support for the creation of a business accelerator in Collingwood and the South Georgian Bay area. And as a reminder of what an accelerator is, it's a good sort of place to start. It provides programming, coaching, and mentoring to a select group of high growth potential businesses, startups and entrepreneurs, generally creating employment opportunities and creating economic activity in the area in which it resides. And so the Accelerator project appears in both the community-based strategic plan within an economic development objective and appears as actually the first objective mentioned in the Economic Development Action Plan, both approved in 2020. On June 6th, as you mentioned, a presentation was given to this committee by the Accelerator itself and the board member and acting executive director, Peter Henke, noting its metrics, including the creation of significant early job numbers, hundreds of mentorship hours being provided, and future opportunities. And some of these future opportunities include a continued move towards financial sustainability and either the reduction or elimination of future municipal funding for the programming. And whether that be through revenue generation, corporate sponsorship, private donations, potentially provincial or federal contributions as well. The 2022 contribution, which council has the option of confirming tonight, is already included within the approved 2022 budget document. So we're not looking for quote unquote new funding at this point, rather a confirmation of that funding based on the presentation that was made by the Accelerator, as well as the recommendation by staff this evening. So I'll leave it there. And again, if there are questions or comments, happy to take those.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Before I go to committee, I'll go to our clerk. Is there anyone that is perhaps in the audience or online that would like to ask a question?
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have a couple of attendees. Should they wish to speak, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. None of our attendees today wish to address this staff report, Your Worship.
Thank you. So with that, then I'll go back to committee. Are there any members of the committee who have questions? And I see a couple of cards going up, so I'll just start down the table. Councillor Jeffrey and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hull. So I think that Brandon answered one of my questions. Kind of, it was about the sustainability and how soon we know what that makeup is going to be going forward. And I'm assuming that's going to be in the next budget for us to have a better understanding as to whether the Accelerator can continue with or without the funding level that the town of Collingwood has approved thus far. And my second question is there a cost per job target in terms of the investment in a company? And is there a target in terms of category of businesses with respect to the proposal?
Okay, great. Sir?
Thank you very much. So you are right, the financial sustainability will likely come either through budget or their fiscal is a little bit off of the municipals ending, similar to the province, March 31st instead. So there may be some discussion in 2023, though the ideal moving forward is that that this is a financially sustainable model and that it can continue without or with a significant reduction in municipal involvement from a financial perspective. For the second question, it's a bit of a complicated question, the cost per job target. When you're talking about potentially provincial or federal programs, sometimes $100,000 a job could be their target, certainly not the target here. And not that we've specifically identified a cost per job. And again, there's also a long-term piece to this as well. So one job that happens right now, there may be 5 jobs that happen to that community or that company in the future as it continues to grow and scale based on, the impact the accelerator makes. I'd say, it's difficult to put a specific number on it, and we haven't necessarily set that target, but generally in the municipal sphere, 10,000 per direct job plus everything in sort of the indirect jobs and sort of offsets of that can be a decent target I've seen in other municipalities, with that coming down over time. So that's sort of the initial job numbers where immediately after the accelerator happens, that's what happens. But then sometimes those businesses will go from 10 to 100 employees and that cost per job decreases over time. When we're talking about target industries or specifically targeted types of companies and businesses, we're looking at not just necessarily technology, so software design, app development, those types of things. You're also looking at tech enabled and tech facilitated, and that can really be any type of company, frankly, as long as they can use technology to scale and grow their business in a meaningful way. Or maybe it's operational changes that they want to make in their supply chain or their logistics or their inventory to help them grow. The accelerators are a good landing place for them. So it really could be in any type of industry, any type of target there. But generally tech and tech enabled is kind of the way that it's positioned.
A
Follow-up?
Please. Yeah, thank you. That's great, understanding that. And my question arose out of interest in at what point when we're helping a business accelerate where it comes down to the benefit to the owner or employer as opposed to the number of jobs we're creating. So that was where I was heading with that question, and where do you find the balance for that? I think it's asked and answered.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hall. I just wanted to say I'm just so excited to support staff's recommendation. I feel that Collingwood is so fortunate to have this nonprofit organization that's solely dedicated to small and medium-sized businesses growing. And I think the report confirms what we heard from Mr. Henke a few weeks ago, that already in the first year, they've helped 6 businesses expand their revenues between 100 and 300%. And they've added, including jobs that are in the process of people being hired, 21 new jobs and 25 remote jobs. And I wouldn't mind, but just by way of comment, in the next report we might get on this accelerator, the concept of multiplier effect. And I'm always intrigued to see what the experts think if 1 job or 10 are created in our town. How does this support our other businesses that are in town? How many jobs and how much employment or revenue, I should say, are created because of that? Because I think, to me, that's where there's so much spin-off when we see this kind of growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. And you're right. The spin-off is really the long-term opportunity in terms of the growth, for sure. Anyone else question, comment? Okay. So I have mover and seconder. We've had an opportunity for questions. And so therefore I will call the vote then. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Our second staff report then is P 2022-22, County of Simcoe Municipal Comprehensive Review, Town of Collingwood formal comments on proposed growth management official plan amendment, final forecast, and land needs assessment. Staff report P 2022-22, County of Simcoe Municipal Comprehensive Review, Town of Collingwood formal comments and proposed growth management official plan amendment, final forecast, and land needs assessment be received. and further that report P 2022-22 be forwarded to the County of Simcoe as the Town of Collingwood's formal comments on the proposed growth management official plan amendment, final forecasts and associated land needs assessment representing the outcome of phase 1 of the municipal comprehensive review. I'm going to take the liberty of actually severing it simply because the second part, there may be a change based on any questions. See any, but anyway. So can I get a mover and seconder for the first part? I've got Councillor Madigan and I've got Councillor Berman. And although I've severed it, with your permission, Clerk Almas, let's open up the whole thing to any public question or comment if there is any.
Certainly. Thank you, Your Worship. Again, any of our attendees wishing to address the staff report, please press the raise your hand feature.
And I apologize. I'm going to interject. I may have been premature. Did staff want to comment first on what was actually being presented? My apologies. Director Valentine?
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have a bit of maybe a little bit longer presentation than Manager Kenny's to go with this report, given the depth of information. So if it's appropriate, we'd be happy to present that at this time.
Great.
Okay, thank you. We do have a PowerPoint presentation, which I see is starting up on the screen. Perfect. So it certainly has been a few months since we've been in front of this committee on the topic of the County of Simcoe Municipal Comprehensive Review, but the county has hit a milestone and they are requesting input from the public and from ourselves as a lower tier municipality at this time. So next slide, please. Just for the benefit of everyone watching today and anyone who might be new to this particular program, a quick refresher that a Municipal Comprehensive Review, or MCR as we call it for short, is a land use planning process where the County of Simcoe's official plan is being aligned with the province's growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, as well as the provincial policy statement. And this type of project is happening across the area of the province that is under the growth plan. The growth plan itself is the Ontario government's initiative to plan for growth and development in a way that supports economic prosperity, protects the environment, and helps communities to achieve a high quality of life. And they certainly do that within the context of recognizing that the Greater Golden Horseshoe is one of the fastest growing regions in North America. And we should be planning for that expected growth in a way that benefits our communities and represents the most sustainable development possible. So the growth plan then is to be implemented through upper and lower tier planning documents, including official plans and zoning bylaws. And in doing so, the county's MCR is intended to prepare policies that establish an overall development pattern for the entire county through to the year 2051. So it is important that we have a 30-year time frame that we're talking about today. The policies are housed in the county's official plan, and this work will in turn set the stage for our own official plan review at the town of Collingwood and for others throughout the county. Before we leave this slide, I just want to be clear that this is a provincially led process. So the province sets the stage and they produce the growth forecasts for the County of Simcoe. And the county must then allocate those forecasts amongst the 16 lower tier partners. The county, as well as our own official plan, does have to conform to the province's framework. And we have the opportunity then to refine that higher order framework into how we'd like to see growth accommodated in our individual communities. Next slide, please. So with that context, you can well imagine that an MCR is not it's not a simple process, and the county has tried to make it more manageable and digestible by dividing it into two phases. We are nearing the close of the first phase, which is primarily looking at the question of how growth will be managed across the county to 2051. And the key question being posed is how much to grow. So while the total growth that the county must plan for, as I mentioned, is set out by the province, it must forecast how this growth will occur across the 16 lower tier municipalities. And they do this by looking at historic growth data, as well as top down and bottom up factors such as births, deaths, in and out migration, economic and social forces, commuting patterns, all within the context of planning for complete, healthy, and compact communities. So the main products of phase 1 are growth projections of population and employment for each municipality, and a land needs assessment, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's forecasting how much land is needed to accommodate the growth that's being allocated to each individual municipality. The county then takes that background information and translates it into a growth management framework, which includes policies for their official plan in a way that conforms to the province's growth plan and is consistent with provincial policy. You'll see on the slide that there is a second phase, which has started but has not progressed yet to conclusion. And it involves answering the question where to grow, as well as updating mapping and policies related to natural heritage, agricultural systems, climate change, and watershed management. Next slide, please. So the MCR has been going on for more than a year, but now the county is nearing the end of that first phase. And several drafts of growth forecasting and land needs assessments have been produced and have been available for comment throughout the process. But now we're at the final stages, and we do have a final version of the data that will form the basis of the proposed official plan amendment. So all 3 of these products were released on June 2nd of this year. The county hosted an open house on June 21st, as well as a public meeting on June 28th. And municipal comments from the town and others are due by the 8th of July. And that's why you're hearing from us tonight at Strategic Initiatives Committee rather than our regular channel through the Development and Operations Committee. Next slide, please. So this slide summarizes the final forecasts, which include the allocation of population and employment to the lower tiers and the land needs assessment. In this round, the county took a stronger focus on regional market area concepts and looked collectively at how growth would impact 2 subregions within the county that share similar characteristics. So this regional market area approach was used in essence to recognize that there are differences in growth pressures faced at the northern part of the county compared to the southern part of the county, and to ensure that both of these regional market areas can continue to grow in a manner that accommodates the unique characteristics that exist within these subregions. So as you can imagine, the town of Collingwood is in the northern regional market area, and it is identified as a primary settlement area in the province's growth plan. And what the plan says about primary settlement areas is that the majority of population and employment growth shall be directed to these areas. And there's good planning reasons behind that. Primary settlement areas are where most of the hard and soft services exist to make efficient use of land that supports climate resilient and transit supportive communities, and to ensure that we can preserve large tracts of environmentally sensitive and agricultural and rural areas outside of our settlement areas. And there are many other planning reasons as well. So the town of Collingwood is provincially designated as a growth node, and the MCR, combined with local efforts through the town's official plan review project, which is running in parallel to the MCR, does allow us to determine how we can accommodate the expected growth in a way that meets our vision and results in complete, healthy, compact, and sustainable communities. And I would venture to add the word affordable communities to that list in recognition of the housing crisis. So where did the county land with respect to the town of Collingwood? From a population projection perspective, the town is forecasted to grow by 17,000 and change residents, again, over a 30-year time horizon. And a quick note here that our council did request a reduction in this population allocation to the town of Collingwood through our last iteration of comments back in November of last year. This change was not acted on by the county in order to remain in conformity with the growth plan, which does indicate the majority of population growth should occur in primary settlement areas like the town of Collingwood. From an employment projection perspective, goodness, that's a tongue twister, they've landed on 6,200 additional jobs, again, by 2051. So when these numbers are translated into land needs based on current supply and anticipated demand, the county indicates that no additional land is required to be designated for residential development in the town. And the county is also suggesting that the housing mix will evolve to meet market demand and to continue us on a path to complete and compact communities with a greater emphasis on higher density forms such as townhouses and apartments. From an employment perspective, it looks a bit different. The county is anticipating a deficit of 94 gross hectares by 2051. And for context here, the town's consultant that's working on the official plan review does feel that this is a bit of an aggressive projection as part of the county's work. But even with that more aggressive lens, the town would not be in a deficit position until the year 2041. Next slide, please. So in terms of commentary for the county's consideration around these growth forecasts and land needs assessment, staff are suggesting that we would continue to articulate a concern that's been a common thread of the town of Collingwood since the beginning of the MCR process, is how hard and soft services will keep pace with the projected growth. And in particular, a continued discussion on the role of the town of Collingwood in providing infrastructure that is to support growth in other communities. The second recommended comment is to request that the town collaborate or that the county collaborate with the town on the second phase of the MCR and beyond to look more closely at the employment land deficit as well as the forecast, and potentially including a sub-regional approach across the northern regional market area, because there's other municipalities in that market area that are also showing an employment land deficit position. And recognizing that we do have some time to grapple with this issue, as the shortfall is not projected to be attained until 2041. And then lastly, as indicated in the report, council may wish to amend the staff recommendation to continue to request a reduction in population allocation for the town of Collingwood. Next slide, please. So that covers off the growth forecast and land needs assessment. So this slide transitions us now to the proposed county official plan amendment. And again, what that does is it acts on those numerical benchmarks and it translates those into policy requirements. The stated purpose of the official plan amendment is to update the County of Simcoe plan to provide policies addressing growth management in accordance with the growth plan and the provincial policy statement. And they do need to ensure consistency and conformity with those provincial level documents. And the effect of the policies is to support planning for complete, healthy, compact, and sustainable communities through the preparation of appropriate policies to create a county-wide growth and settlement framework. Next slide, please. So the amendment itself, it's a lengthy and information-rich document. It's about 40 pages in length, and it is linked to the staff report. But for the purposes of this presentation, we've pulled out a few of the most important highlights that are focused on impacts to the town of Collingwood. So just so that we all are on the same page with respect to the acronyms that we're using here, within a primary settlement area, there's essentially 3 categories of land. The first is the built up area, or BUA, and that's the part of the town where we have existing development, the downtown core, employment nodes, and existing neighborhoods. And this was actually defined as a specific area by the province in 2006. The second part that we talk about is a designated greenfield area, or a DGA. And those are lands that are designated for future housing and or employment development, but have not yet been built out. And then the third category of land that we talk about is the rural area, and that is where we only have very limited growth that's currently permitted. So from a highlights perspective, the draft official plan amendment does seek to increase the intensification target within our built up area from 40% to 50%. And similarly, the density target for our greenfield area would be increased from 50 to 55 jobs and people per hectare. To ensure that growth occurs in a logical, efficient, and orderly manner that mirrors our infrastructure availability, the official plan amendment is also requiring that municipalities develop phasing plans for their settlement areas. The official plan amendment also outlines a comprehensive process for identifying locations for future growth where land deficits are projected. And lastly, it permits the consideration of development applications on lands that are currently designated or the addition of further designated lands within settlement areas under certain circumstances, even if consideration of those applications would actually exceed the growth forecasts. Next slide, please. So that was the highlight reel of a very complex official plan amendment. And we've transitioned now in this slide into the recommended commentary. And it's staff's general opinion that the proposed policies would support good land use planning for complete, compact, sustainable, and healthy communities in a way that growth is logistically phased in a manner that addresses our infrastructure needs, transit supportive development, efficient use of land, and appropriate transitions between urban and non-urban issues. Affordability, though not directly addressed by the official plan amendment, is indirectly assisted by increasing density targets within built-up areas for intensification, as well as our greenfield areas, and putting a stronger emphasis on a housing mix or choice of dwelling types that would reduce costs, reduce long-term asset management, and hard and soft service investment. For the most part, staff would suggest that there is a suitable level of flexibility built in to address local circumstances, and the county provides for a range of tools to implement the proposed policies. Staff are also recommending the addition of some policies to ensure that we have some short-term gains within our built-up area. The official plan policies are suggesting that over the long term, municipalities look at such tools as pre-zoning appropriate areas of our community for higher density development and intensification, as well as zoning in areas that would normally be single or semi-detached units, primarily looking at expanding those to other unit types. But it does take a while for zoning to catch up to official plan policies. And we feel that in the short term, adding some targets for housing mix within our built up area would assist to attain some meaningful strides. Within the designated greenfield area, we're suggesting that we include targets for development types and lot sizes rather than inflexible requirements. We've heard a lot recently about many innovative ways to address our current housing crisis, and we have a lot of creative thinkers out there who are working with the town and others to look more closely at housing types that might not fit our traditional definitions. And so we're looking for some flexibility here to ensure that that creativity and innovation can continue. And lastly, we're suggesting a coordinated regional market area or sub-regional approach to look at the employment land deficit and reframe policies for municipalities where the boundary of the municipality is also the boundary of a settlement area. Some policies are not quite set up to recognize that unique circumstance, and we have noted which ones those would be. Next slide, please. Some additional feedback is contained in the staff report, and that includes recognizing some frustration that we've experienced and heard through the MCR process about the perceived mixed messaging from the province around growth management. On the one hand, the forecasts provided by the province do represent the minimum amount of growth that municipalities are required to plan for. But on the other hand, the growth plan does indicate that municipalities should eliminate excess lands that are not currently required for growth within the time horizon by either down designating them or using tools such as holding symbols to ensure that growth does not occur in the short term. So within this context, the county has certainly attempted to find a balance, which includes not requiring the elimination of excess lands, most of which exist in the northern market area, but also acknowledges that this remains an evolving conversation with the province. The county is also offering some additional discussion and consideration of what would be considered appropriately designated lands for growth within existing settlement areas. And we're recommending that this work also look at golf courses, aggregate operations, and waste sites where they might exist within settlement areas, as those could be potentially sites for preferred growth rather than expanding our designated greenfield area into rural lands. And finally, to cap off this slide, it's recommended that we or that the county look at some additional forward thinking and more flexible policies that can take into account specific planning contexts as they arise, particularly if we as a municipality are confronted with an excellent opportunity for affordable housing, housing choice, or expanding our employment options for our residents. We'd like to see where there's a demonstrated need for that type of development and where it makes sense from an orderly and compact growth perspective that the municipality would have the flexibility to consider such proposals. Next slide, please. I promise we're almost at the end. I know this is a lot of information to take in. So beyond the three products being the growth forecast, the land needs assessment, and the draft official plan amendment, the staff report does cover some related matters that we'd like to quickly highlight. So we have noted that the time frame for review provided by the county of just over 1 month, which is a culmination of a year's worth of work and several hundreds of pages of documentation. It is quite a compressed time frame. Of course, staff have provided the best advice that we could for council's consideration within that time frame. But we would venture that this is a challenging aspect for meaningful engagement, not only with municipalities, but also for the public and other stakeholders who are trying to digest the lengthy documents that were provided in a very short time frame. We also noted that the town's official plan update is running in parallel to the MCR. And this is particularly important because the county also happens to be the approval authority for our official plan. So we've worked together in parallel to try our best to align the two documents. But at some point, likely some additional policy adjustments will be required at the town level to ensure conformity with the MCR results once they're approved by the province. It's also of note that the MCR does not consider all existing or proposed minister's zoning orders, and where those exist or should those go through in the near future, both levels, the county and the town, would need to rationalize their planning documents around changes that are approved through the minister. Luckily, official plans are living documents, so we do have several opportunities to make future adjustments, particularly within the 30-year timeframe. The county has a next opportunity in 2027, so we will have the potential to course correct if there are if growth underperforms or overperforms the projections. And to the final slide, please. So we'll cap off here with the next steps and a summary of the recommendation. The county will be collecting comments from the recent June consultation events, as well as what will be forwarded by municipalities. They'll review those along with their consultant, and they may make adjustments to, in particular, the draft official plan amendment. That amendment then does move forward for consideration for county council to adopt. And if they consider it appropriate for adoption, then it is forwarded to the province, who is the approval authority, which means that a final decision on this first phase of the MCR is still likely a few months off. In the interim, county staff and the consultant would continue to work on that phase 2 that you saw at the beginning of the presentation, and that would also involve a second official plan amendment being produced. So all that being said, the recommendation today before you for consideration is that the staff report be submitted as the Town of Collingwood's formal comments on phase 1 of the Municipal Comprehensive Review. Certainly happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair, or provide further information as committee wishes. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Valentine, for that excellent and very comprehensive overview. So I had severed it, and before I go back to the clerk, I did have Councillor Madigan, Councillor Berman. I am going to ask, or I am going to call the question simply to receive, and then I'll go back to the clerk for an opportunity for public engagement, and then we'll have discussion around the table. So all those in favor of receiving this report? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Clerk Olmos, is there anyone that wishes to speak to what has been received, or perhaps offer comment before we vote on forwarding it to the county?
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have, I think, some guests in our gallery. If there's anybody in the gallery first that would like to present to the Standing Committee regarding this report, please step forward. Seeing none.
Anyone online?
We do have some attendees online. Please press your raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And no one at this time, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. So I've read it in, and if it's okay with Councillor Madigan and Berman, I will use you again as the mover and seconder. Are there any questions, comment from around the table as to the report and the direction to forward? Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the only question I really have is the wording of the one comment, ongoing collaboration with the county is recommended through both the MCR and town official plan update projects as they evolve, including recognition that an MZO may need to be rationalized at both levels to ensure conformity between the two official plans. And I was just wondering, the slide also said that the county isn't recognizing existing MZOs. So if my first question is, do we have any existing MZOs? And then the second question is, would that comment be premature because we're not really sure? Or is it being proactive? Or is it being used as a block? I think mostly direction would come from the province. So I just wanted to be sure. Otherwise, I think it's a great report. I like all the comments. I think you've picked up on all our frustrations, but I want to know, I have a solid understanding of the intent of that comment.
Okay, thank you. And for those following along at home as part of the presentation, it was the second last slide, third bullet point down. But Director Valentine, if you could offer a comment or answer the questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the councillor, I would suggest that this comment was primarily, as you indicated, a proactive flag that there are not just in the town of Collingwood, but across the county, as I understand it. And I don't have the details on every specific circumstance, but certainly county staff have indicated that there is more than one MZO at play. And it's just really a flag that when we say there's a deficit of employment land, for example, that doesn't account for any additional employment land loss through an MZO within the town of Collingwood. So the comment was intended certainly not as a block and more of as a collaborative outreach that should an MZO be approved by the minister in the future, that we would be looking again at the planning documents and background thereto and ensure that everything appropriately aligns at the county and municipal level in accordance with any decision we may get from the minister.
Is there a follow-up? Or?
No, except to ask that that one be severed from when we're approving the comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
And are you comfortable if I just reference that very specific third bullet?
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? I've got Councillor Hamlin and then the Acting Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions and a few comments as well. One comment I wanted to make is I noticed the slide that said that the county intends to look at golf courses, aggregate sites, and former waste disposal sites for future development. And the one I would like to just make a comment on is golf courses. That is a hot button, obviously, for our community and for every community I've ever paid attention to with a golf course that the owner wants to redevelop for housing. And I would not be in support of that kind of provision being in the official plan. I think that kind of change needs full community input and a lot of discussion. Residents count on that green space, and although many golf courses have been converted, it's not only a green space, it's a recreational amenity and requires a full thinking through, if I can put it that way. I also wanted to comment briefly on the aspect that the county, and I know the province supports as well, that supply will be the answer to our affordable housing crisis. And although there is some merit, I'm going to emphasize the word some merit to that, I am not a full believer, and I know our Affordable Housing Task Force is also not a believer. We have currently some 4,000 units that are draft approved in Collingwood and not built. And developers are only going to bring that to market if they can get a sufficient return, and they can only do that by charging enough, and just requiring more to be built doesn't mean it's going to get built at a good price. I spoke even this weekend with someone who advises the development community and's been doing so for several decades, and he is doing some affordable housing projects in Toronto right now. And always the problem is there's a financial gap between what it costs to build and to rent those facilities at below market rents. I'm talking about rental projects, and what the project, can produce. There's just, someone has to step in that's not the developer to put funds into it to make it financially viable. And from my own point of view, there's different ways we can help for sure, but really I think it's the federal and provincial governments who have the broad taxing authority that are going to have to step up and help. So I just wanted to comment on the supply argument. The other comment I had was on the employment land needs. And I know our municipality for at least a decade, perhaps a bit longer, hasn't had what would you call it, a development manager who goes out and looks for opportunities for our town for kinds of businesses to locate here. And I did ask this question of Manager Kenny at a council meeting a few months ago, and he did confirm that wasn't his job either. And I raise this because I want our staff to think about when they're looking at these numbers with our consultants and the county, whether if we were to hire someone like we used to have and like a lot of municipalities have, whose job it is to identify types of businesses that our community should go after, and we were successful in getting some modicum of that kind of business, would that affect the employment land needs? And to me, I would look at that kind of analysis over and above what I fear has been done is what has been the take-up over the last number of years. So I just wanted to make that comment. And then my last thoughts are around the density that is being downloaded, I'll say, onto us from the county. And I know we're going to see more of this in our draft official plan next week. But I've been asking since the beginning, what will all this density look like? And of course, it's a hard question to be answered, and I haven't got an answer. But I can see from this report before us that if 50% of our intensifications going into our existing communities, what does that mean? Does that mean, just granny flats in the backyard? And maybe this is my question I'll ask through you, Mr. Acting Mayor. what will that look at? Like, is it just granny flats? Is it going to mean 4-story apartment buildings on every corner? I just think as we move into this, I at least would appreciate some understanding of what this means. I know from previous reports, staff has told us there's some 500 lots in our built-up area that are, ready to go if somebody wanted to build a house. But that's nowhere near, like, even if we say 3 people a house, which we don't, I think we say 2.2, that's just a few thousand people compared to the 17,000 that we're going to be accommodating. So, and tied in with that, and that's my question, my second part question to that is, to me, compact communities and intensification means the design has to be extraordinary. We're going to, it's one thing just to lump in, every unit we can. It's another thing to make sure it fits in, gives privacy to existing homes, is architecturally pleasant to look at, and will create a community that we're all going to be proud of in 20 years. So my second question is, how soon can we bring in our urban design guidelines following the release of our draft official plan? Thank you.
Director Valentine, so what does the look and feel in terms of intensification look like? And then the second part was with regards to the urban design guidelines.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just furiously writing down, and that's certainly a lot to unpack. And yes, I agree with the councillor 100%. It's difficult to confirm exactly the built form that would correspond with the density and intensification targets because there can be many different built forms. We could put all our eggs into secondary dwelling units, and that would need to be permitted sort of ubiquitously across the town, or we could take a mixed approach where it's appropriate to have some higher density walk-up apartments, for example. But I certainly don't think anyone would suggest that an apartment on every corner is what's required. But as the councillor mentions, this is exactly the right time to be asking these kinds of questions because the county has, for the most part, left the flexibility to the municipalities to determine how that density gets incorporated into the existing urban fabric and also into new greenfield development. So I don't want to reveal too much about the official plan, but certainly a system of nodes and corridors where the majority of intensification will be focused within the built-up area is currently being proposed. And that's intended in part to take some of the pressure off existing neighborhoods. But certainly we can't discount some intensification in the form of secondary units, duplexes, triplexes, where there was once a single family dwelling unit. There's simply no way around that if we want to achieve our environmentally and social sustainability goals, as well as providing affordable housing from an economic development perspective. So I do think we'll have more information about the look and feel through the OP review, and Mr. Palmer will be here to present next Monday, and some of these questions would be entirely appropriate to ask at that time as well. The urban design manual, I think, was the second question, and backing up a little bit, one of the key tenets of the new official plan as well was to strengthen the urban design policies, which set the framework to provide an urban design guideline that has more teeth than it has in the past. So step one is really to ensure that we get that policy framework correct, which would be to a certain extent translated from an implementation perspective. Some things will go into the zoning bylaw update and others into the urban design guidelines. So once council does confirm with the adoption of the official plan that we're on the right track from a policy framework, then those two products will fall from that, likely in late 2022, early 2023. That's not to say we can't make some short-term adjustments to the urban design guidelines. This committee and council has specifically noted tree preservation, for example. So there are some work in that regard to come forward in advance of that 2022-2023 timeframe. With your permission, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to back up to one comment that the councillor made very early on about golf courses. And I just want to be entirely clear that the county is not suggesting that golf courses, waste sites, other underutilized properties within our settlement areas be used for development. What the county is suggesting that they engage with future discussions with municipalities. It's kind of a strange policy that commits the county to a future discussion, but doesn't land us anywhere at the moment in terms of what lands are considered appropriately designated within our settlement areas. And what staff are suggesting is we do need to talk about these areas, golf courses, waste sites, aggregate pits, which are typically, you don't get new golf courses in urban centers typically anymore. That's more of a rural use as we see them. But really, we can't ignore those areas. Either we collectively decide that those will continue in the way that they're being used, or we can look at them potentially for growth. So really, it's to initiate that conversation with the counties to ensure that we are aligned in direction on some of those underutilized or differently used areas within our settlement boundaries. So just some clarification around what that comment was intended to achieve.
Thank you, Director Valentine. Is there a follow-up at all? No? Okay, thank you. Anyone else with a question, comment? So I'm going to go with Councillor Carrier, and then I've got Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Just a question of clarification on the clarification of the golf course issue. I'm not sure I followed that. I will readily admit that in public. So we have two golf courses, Blue Mountain Golf and Country Club and Cranberry in our boundaries. Cranberry, from my understanding, is parkland dedication and therefore would be outside of that policy because when it was developed, that was their green space that was developed into a golf course. So I'm assuming no future discussions with the county, just in case any developers are, wringing their hands in glee, that they can finally develop that into a housing development. And I have a couple of other comments, but just a clarification on the clarification, please.
Sure. Okay. Director Valentine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. The comment was intended to be general, Councillor, not with respect to any specific location. I mean, if this committee prefers that the word golf course be stricken, those were some examples of typically underutilized lands within urban boundaries that can be looked to accommodate growth before we expand out into the rural area. But if golf courses are off the table from this committee and council's perspective, you can certainly strike that. Again, it was intended to be generally, how do we look at some of these lands, and does the county consider those appropriately designated for growth, or do they consider them hands off for growth? So there's a lack of clarity on where the county may be coming from, and we do think this merits discussion. But committee's restructuring of that comment, if you wish golf courses to not be part of that discussion, that's certainly your prerogative.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not comfortable with the comment as it's written, but like my colleague, I'm not a huge fan of the oversight of the planning regime by the county either. I was there before. I sat at county council. I'm not comfortable with some of the decisions that were made in the past. And by that, you look at the area transportation study that was done by the county and the significant investment in the south. And I made these comments publicly before you appointed me to council. I did submit them, I want to say well over a year ago, to the county, that I think the county has a bias in supporting growth in the south. There's still no resolution, as far as I'm concerned, to water and wastewater issues that had to be resolved in the past in the south, even though we have a water issue here. And I also had issues with MMH in the past, but we're talking about today. The EDO comment that Councillor Hamlin raised is the one who used to work with industry looking to support moving here. But once again, let's also acknowledge that employment growth is 70 to 80% within our community. It's businesses here that want to expand and grow that bring the employment. Just a clarification, Acting Mayor Hall to the Director of Planning, what is employment lands? We've had lots of discussion, and I know I'm skirting an issue here that I don't want to have to declare a conflict on or disqualifying interest, but is it based upon square footage of an industrial building, or is it actual people working in a place? Because you can have a very big building and the factory of the future, and we'll just have to look at Pilkington or Nippon Sheet Glass as an example. That used to employ 3 to 4 times the number of people that it does today because of the way it modernized and evolved over time. So the factories of the future, I was taught by our economic development officer over 12 years ago, has a dog and a man. And the dog is there to keep people out of the building, and the man is there to feed the dog. There are no people. So it's classified, I think, as employment lands, but it doesn't really bring anybody to our community that we want here.
Director Valentine, could you offer comment or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will try my best with that question, which I might phone a friend in passing that along to Urban Metrics, who has done the employment lands forecasting on behalf of the municipality. In terms of, it's my understanding that the county is looking at both space extensive needs, as the councillor mentions. Employment lands are for large industrial office type uses, not for the typical population-based employment that's generated within a community. It's typically for export products that are used outside of the community. So that looks at the land needs for that type of employment, as well as the jobs that it generates. So I believe it's both that the county is looking at from a land needs and growth and settlement forecasting perspective. But certainly understand that that type of employment, per GFA may not produce the same number of jobs as other employment types, though they may be higher paying potentially than a service level job. So it's my understanding that the county looks at both of those factors, but I can certainly seek clarification from the town's own consultant on that as well.
Thank you. And just a further clarification, do the comments have to be submitted by July 8th, did you say?
That was the date in the presentation, and I actually wanted to follow up on that,
So
given what we're
this
being
is
asked tonight.
SIC,
Yeah.
and SIC goes to council, which I'm believing is post July 8th, and we can change our recommendations and comments because that's the way the process works here. So unless we comment today, does that mean any future comments post the 8th are invalid or will not be considered?
I'm looking up here, but I'm also looking at our clerk in terms of from a process standpoint.
From a process standpoint, yes, this standing committee obviously makes decisions that need to be considered by council and ratified or modified at that table. So it would depend on what the county's timelines are and what their deadlines are to ensure that the comments are attributed appropriately to what council's decision is going to be, not strategic initiatives.
Would it be appropriate, Clerk Almus, if the recommendation, either as presented or amended potentially tonight, was forwarded as requested by the county by July 8th, with a paragraph to the effect that this still needs to go to council, and should it be ratified at council, we'll provide notice, and if there were additional comment or changes, we reserve that right.
Thank you, Worship. That is something that we have done in the past and has been acceptable to the county, but we can definitely include some caveat to that within the response.
Okay, I'll maybe look to somebody around the table to make that recommendation, should they see fit.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hall. Those are my comments.
Okay. Anyone else? My apologies, I've got a list here. So Councillor Doherty, you're next.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hull. Actually, the discussion that we have had and the questions and answers that we've had just now actually are going to satisfy my questions quite well. I was particularly concerned also about the notion of converting golf course lands to potentially residential lands. And I also did have a concern about targeting simply increased supply of housing as being equivalent to increasing affordable housing. So, but that's been discussed quite well. Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hull. Just regarding the discussion that Councillor Carrier had asked regarding the employment lands as the number one entrepreneurial municipality of our size in Canada, do we get penalized by the fact that maybe many of those self-employed persons are working from their home or from multiple businesses? And how does that work into the formula?
Yeah, that's a great question. Director Valentine.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So just keep in mind that we're talking about employment lands, which is a very specific term from a growth plan perspective. And that means offices and factories, essentially major office and industrial uses. So we do have employment projections for many, many other types of industries within that 6,200 and some jobs. But from a space extensive employment lands perspective, which is industrial and office, the county is suggesting we have a deficit. So just keep in mind that what is accommodated on employment lands is not the entire employment picture across the town. There's many other types of employment that would be accommodated within mixed use areas and other appropriately designated regional commercial zones, for example. So really, when we're talking about employment lands, it's just industrial and major office and warehouse uses primarily. So I don't think that having folks that work from home in other industries would affect that calculation.
You follow up?
So just to be clear, because I need to be clear, is that if you're self-employed out of your home, you are counted in the 6,280 if you create yourself a new job going forward, or you are not? Is that 6,280 related directly to the employment lands?
No. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
No, go ahead.
My apologies, through you, Mr. Chair. The 6,200 and change jobs is all of the jobs, both population generated and employment land based. So the employment land piece is just a subset of those jobs. So that number is the jobs within the expected growth within all jobs in all categories in the town of Collingwood to 2051.
Thank you.
Great. Go ahead.
Thank you. Many of the questions that I had have been asked and answered. There's a couple though. Just to be clear regarding our official plan review through the chair, are we still on target to have that first draft of our official plan review in the next? Is it 6 weeks, somewhere around there? Is it in the next week?
Next Monday.
Thank you. Are we still on track for that, Director Valentine?
Go ahead, Director Valentine.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, there is a special meeting of council on Monday morning from 10 to 12, and I defer to the clerk to be sure I've got that time right, where we are intending to release the official plan for the purposes of continuing the conversation with the community throughout the summer on its content.
Thank you. And we're not doing our official plan because of the MCR. We were redoing our official plan because we were on schedule to do it regardless. Yes? Through the chair.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. Municipality is required to look at its official plan every 5 to 10 years, depending on the circumstances. And that is not always aligned with the county's MCR work or other work ongoing at the provincial level.
Thank you. And I'm curious to know where our, because we've had lots and lots of talk about our ICBL and the planning guidelines that we put in place connected to it, and of course now the OLT that is coming regarding that. But how does the SCAP fit in with what we're seeing regarding the MCR and the county's official plan? Will we be seeing trouble at the county when it comes to this? From an alignment point of view?
Go ahead, Director Valentine.
Through Mr. Chair, from an ICBL perspective, certainly these growth projections are looking at a 30-year time horizon with the understanding that there will be ups and downs for a variety of reasons within that time frame. So in our discussions with the county, that really hasn't been a main point of discussion because we are collectively working hard to see the ICBL wrapped up and to move forward with the SCAP and to be looking at the best type of development where we can allocate capacity that benefits the community in the way that aligns with our vision. The more important component is the official plan review. We are marching in parallel with the county, and that will be the more difficult two pieces of policy documentation to align. And it will really depend how the consultation rolls out this summer, how much feedback we receive, if we have Indigenous communities participating actively in our official plan review, as that can affect the timelines to where we land. We might be ahead of the county, we might be behind the county. And that's why we've thought it was important to emphasize in the staff report that official plans are living documents. So we've done a lot of work through our OP review. There's more to come. It will come to conclusion, but that doesn't mean it's static. We may have to go back and look at some of the policies to ensure conformity with the county plan once their MCR process ultimately reaches its conclusion as well. So it's a bit of a tricky situation, lots of moving parts, but the county has been working collaboratively with us to ensure they align to the extent that's possible.
Thank you. And one more, which has to do with the comprehensive zoning bylaw, which we're going to have to work our way through once the official plan is in place. And I wonder, just from an employment lens, back sort of connecting that to this, we have within our comprehensive zoning bylaw a provision whereby no one can have two jobs in their house. Even though there are no doubt hundreds of dwellings within our town that have more than one business operating out of them. Would that, if we align the zoning bylaw with reality at some point in the not too distant future, what would that actually do to our employment lands? I know you were saying that the employment lands is different than the number of jobs, but if we're counting the jobs accurately, would that change anything when it comes to the official plans? Through the chair.
Director Valentine?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So it is confusing that employment lands is really just accommodating a subset of our jobs, being industries, warehouse, offices primarily. When we look at the whole other bucket, and I believe the councillor is talking about home occupations primarily, population-driven jobs, which are nested within that 6,200 and change projected growth. Again, similar to housing, how we accommodate those jobs outside of the ones that are dedicated to employment lands, whether that's through intensification, as the councillor suggests, having two home occupations within a dwelling, whether that is through mixed use in our nodes and corridors, or through dedicated commercial areas, regional commercial areas, and other population-based employment areas within our community. That's within the purview of the municipality to grapple with. And we do have this specific one on our list of items that we intend to address through the zoning bylaw review.
Thank you. And my last thing is a bit of a comment, and I'd like to say thank you to our staff for working their way through this, because crises, no doubt, are they don't just build character, they reveal it. And I think that, well, I find it pretty ironic that in one breath we've got lots of people saying, oh, we have a housing crisis, we have a desperate need for affordable housing, but boy, it better be pretty, and it better not be inconvenient to neighbors, and it better not increase density. And so to find a way through that needle is so tough for the planning staff. And so I commend you for your hard work.
Before I go to CAO Skinner, anyone else around the table? CAO Skinner, you have comment?
Thank you, Chair. I've noticed that there were a few questions around the employment lands. And one of the comments that Director Valentine mentioned earlier on the slides, I think might bear her talking about a little bit more, but it was related to looking at or talking with the county about looking at employment lands and other constraints on a sort of a northern regional basis and what that might turn into in the future. So I was hoping it would be helpful for the members if she said a couple of words about that. Thank you.
Director Valentine?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So the town of Collingwood is not the only municipality within the northern market area to have been identified as having an employment lands deficit, again, for those industrial office and warehouse type uses. So one of our comments is we certainly do think that there is merit to looking at this issue from a sub-regional basis and looking at whether there are potentially areas within the northern regional market area in other municipalities that may have a surplus of this type of land, and really taking a wider perspective on how employment could be accommodated across the northern part of the county. So we did want to make sure that that was on the table. And I don't know who mentioned the word crisis, but I tried to really underscore that even with the county's sort of more aggressive approach to employment land needs, we don't reach a deficit position until 2041. So we do have some time to thoughtfully consider this situation, potentially in partnership with other municipalities across the county, so that we can provide the best recommendation to council for a solution that would work well for our community and potentially collectively for many communities that are in this position. So we're looking at having a more in-depth discussion about employment lands and not an immediate sort of knee-jerk reaction, because we do have some time to look at this issue more comprehensively.
Were there any questions to the comment posed by the question through the CAO? I'm glad that you've referenced the word 2041, so our clerk could just mark in the calendar that Council of 2040 can circle back and deal with the issue at that time. It'd be great. Councillor Jeffrey, you made reference, and then I made reference to the slide, but you were looking to have an item severed, and based on some of the other comments, potentially there may be some other changes coming. There is no specific reference in the "and further that." There was reference in the slide presentation, but more importantly in the actual document. I noted on page 7 and again on page 11 specific references to the MZO. Is there something to be tailored specific to that? Or?
Well, my first question with respect to that would be, are there other projects that would evolve other than an MZO that may require collaboration? And if there are, what I would ask is that the wording from page 11 of 12 be amended to remove including recognition that an MZO may need to be rationalized at both levels, which would leave ongoing collaboration with the county as recommended through both the MCR and the town official plan update projects as they evolve to ensure conformity between the two official plans, no matter what that project might entail.
So to your first point, and I'm going to then ask Director Valentine maybe to just confirm. I'm certainly aware of that during the duration of this term, there are other MZO applications that have been in process. In terms of collaboration with the county, definitely, up to the county and then back down to the other municipalities. Other than the House, at the county level, I'm not aware of any that were in collaboration. Now, that said, I'm thinking of the one in Oro-Medonte. There may have been collaboration with the neighboring municipality of the city of Barrie, but I can't confirm. So maybe I'll defer to Director Valentine if that part could be answered, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not aware of any other MZO specifically that requires collaboration with the town of Collingwood at this time. There's certainly been others that have been talked about, but none that are advanced. And what I mean is, for example, the lands that surround the Poplar Health and Wellness Village. This council was approached by other landowners who would be interested in following a similar MZO or tagging on to the MZO that exists today. But outside of the town of Collingwood, I'm not aware of any other MZO at this time that would require collaboration. And perhaps clarification from the councillor. I mean, really the comment did stem specifically from the situation at the Poplar Regional Health and Wellness Village that, it is a big impact, or potentially a big impact, a transformative and exciting project that would need to be rationalized. So what I'm hearing is perhaps generalizing, but I'm not sure if the councillor is suggesting generalizing beyond those lands, or just generalizing should an MZO not go forward, but the development move forward under another tool.
So through the chair, to Director Valentine, I don't think I was suggesting a specific property. My question wasn't, are there other tools beside MZOs that would require that collaboration to occur? And should we limit it to just an MZO? Because we know from the Bill 109 that there'll be a tool there as well, and we haven't referenced it. So I'm wondering if we just generalized, we wouldn't limit ourselves to just the one tool.
Director Valentine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then I do understand the comment, and you are quite correct. There is another tool, the Community Housing and Infrastructure Accelerator, not to be confused with the Business Accelerator, that will be available through Bill 109. So certainly, if it's council's wish to elaborate or just strike out the details and or say reference to any other available tool, that certainly makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yep, that's great. Thanks. So I think when you're ready, if you want to vote on the other part, then I'll just do my amendment to this part and generalize it.
Okay. So I'll go around first. Were there any other items that we were looking to either add additional comment or potentially revise? Councillor Hamlin? Yes. So,
Sorry, I have to push my green button and I forgot. Okay, so what I would like to do, Mr. Acting Mayor, is make an amendment to the report to seek an exclusion of the words golf course from the provision that identifies golf courses, aggregates, and waste disposal sites for further consideration for development.
okay. And if I may, because it may come up anyways, when you're specifically referring to golf course, is the intent by exclusion that it cannot be used for any type of other use, or specifically for the purpose of housing, for example?
I believe that, as Director Valentine explained, that the clause, which sadly I can't find, even though I've been madly scrolling through, but as she explained it, the clause references no specific future use for those three types of current uses, but rather it invites municipalities to explore the redevelopment of those kinds of uses for other development purposes. And I would just like to take out the word golf courses, so there's no encouragement needed to do that.
Okay. Okay, so I've got two items. Were there any, and I'll circle back specifically to each one, but any other items to potentially comment or change? Okay. So, Clerk Almas, I read in the two items and the further at, or that, and I've got my mover and seconder. We've now had a presentation in which there were multiple references through a slide deck, but then we have a comprehensive report in front of us. The report itself does make reference on multiple occasions to the two items that have been mentioned. So I think I've heard and understood, but I just want to be crystal clear, as does probably everyone else, as to what it is that we are asking staff to either amend or remove, and to ensure that it is done in the appropriate locations, so that we're not having to address the issue, etc. With all that said, can you help me out?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. So they'll be both treated as amendments. Councillor Jeffrey's amendment would be with respect to the bullet that's on page 11 of 12, and it's my understanding that the request is not to limit it to MZOs, and it should be put forward as just say, and I may seek Director Valentine's expertise in this, other planning tools or something along that line, so it's not specific to an MZO. Is that correct?
So I've got the mover nodding. Director Valentine, do you have anything to offer to assist?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think the councillor's idea of simply striking off the specific tool does leave the recommended comment broad enough to, rather than listing every potential tool, just to striking off the specific tool leaves it broad enough to ensure that future collaboration happens. We will also take the opportunity to explain to County Council these amendments and where they came from and their intent as well, so that a letter just won't land in their inbox, but we will also meet with them at the earliest possible opportunity. The only other thing I would say is MZO was mentioned as well on page 7 of 12, bullet 2. And it says, and other factors such as a potential MZO, and looking to Councillor Jeffries if the such as a potential MZO should also be stricken from that recommendation, just so that we're open to all possible tools.
Thank you.
Please.
Yes.
Okay. So I think that that is now clear to me. And if I can get it, I'm confident the rest are with me. So, Councillor Jeffrey, do you have a seconder for what it is that you're proposing to amend? And then I will ask the question.
Councillor Berman.
Thank you. Okay. I will ask once if there are any final questions specifically of clarification to the amendment that's been proposed. Clerk Almas, you're comfortable in terms of languaging from a staffing perspective? I'll call a question then. All those in the affirmative to this amendment, and that's unanimous. Then I'll move down the table, and Councillor Hamlin, you were looking to make an amendment that would remove reference to golf courses.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I see it's on page 10 of 12 in the report. There's a reference to the first bullet at the top. Proposed new section 3.2.8, part of the discussion on the meaning of appropriately designated, should consider the status of an approach to uses such as golf courses, ailing resorts, aggregate operations, former waste sites. So I would just be asking for the word golf courses to be struck. And I would also ask through you if Director Valentine could just confirm that's the only place as well.
Okay. So I will ask Director Valentine if they're just to verify that last point or question, and then I'll look for a seconder. Director Valentine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is the only instance of the words golf course, and I have also track checked the document just to be sure my memory hasn't failed me. So that is the instance. Should council wish to delete that reference.
Okay. And that satisfies. Okay. Do you have a seconder, Councillor Hamlin? I see Councillor Doherty. A question or clarification?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. I've heard quite a strong opinion around golf courses, and I wonder if the question for the county is not that we don't talk about golf courses, but in fact that we align our opinions with respect to golf courses not being used for intensification, if that was the intention, as opposed to not to speak with the county about golf courses. The original comment is we should align our intentions with the county around sites such as these three. And I wonder if it is your intention to align your intentions around golf courses or simply not to discuss them.
Thank you. Councillor Hamlin, did you want to offer a comment?
Yes, thank you. No, that's an excellent question. And honestly, I can't tell from the report because, exactly what it is the county's looking for. I'm happy for it. I mean, I think it's a great suggestion from our CAO that we take a position that we don't want golf courses to be under discussion for the town of Collingwood for future development. And if that's the wording that would be best, I'm happy to propose that.
Okay. Just for clarity, Director Valentine, did you want to offer comment on that specific?
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair. And reading the comment, and golf courses, just to be fully clear, was an example of underutilized lands, not a specific reference to any individual situation within the town of Collingwood. But that comment, when read in its entirety, is encouraging a discussion with the county around how these lands will be viewed and could they represent more appropriate lands for growth. And if this committee is suggesting golf courses is off the table for more appropriate lands for growth, then I do feel that deleting it from this particular comment does make sense. But to CAO Skinner's point, some additional wording may also be warranted to be very clear that golf courses will not be considered for future growth areas in the town of Collingwood. So I think it could be a multi-pronged approach to ensure that our intentions are clear.
Okay.
Because we don't get an opportunity to do the wordsmithing before this report goes on, I think my suggestion for an amendment, it will have to be as general as I've put it, but I do agree with the suggestion Director Valentine's made. And if she could please do the wordsmithing, that would be great.
Okay. That's, I'm assuming these are questions specific to, okay. You haven't spoken, so go ahead, sir. Councillor Madigan.
Thank you. I don't know how taking golf courses out of this, especially with this, there's, as Councillor Carrier ever so eloquently and poignantly pointed out, that there's just two examples. Private entities, I don't believe politicians should get in the way. If we take golf courses out of this, the next line is ailing resorts. So if Cranberry, Livingstone, Living Water Resort can prove that their golf course is not substantial and they can't make money from it, no politician should tell them that they can't do it. If these lands are not going to be used as recreational, they could be used as homes, much needed homes. This makes sense. This is Cranberry's, to my knowledge, not going to go anywhere. The golf course, Atoka, and I can't see Blue Mountain Golf and Country too. But these are business entities that if they choose to cease operations, they should have that choice. this is the market will bear it, and this is a free country we live in. I will not be supporting telling anybody what they can do or can't do with their business entities. And I think it would be a grave mistake if this council voted in favor of going to a private business and telling them how to run their operations. And I will be asking for a recorded vote on this amendment in particular.
Okay. So noted. Councillor Carrier?
Thank you. I read the amendment differently than my colleague. I don't see it as saying you can't. It says that later on in the recommendation that it's more appropriate for growth, or could be more appropriate for growth than existing DGAs. I don't think it is. And once again, if we're talking about Cranberry Golf Course, from my history is, and staff can correct me, but that was parkland dedication, and they turned it into a golf course. If they want to turn it back into a parkland, then it's a parkland. I mean, I think they have that right, but it's green space. It's not a golf course. It's green space that happens to be a golf course. But I don't think looking at these and saying that this is a better than the alternative, I would rather have a whole discussion of all the alternatives and saying, no, I'd rather see that golf course developed instead of the DGA. I'd rather have the DGA discussed first before I look at the other infill projects personally.
Acting Deputy Mayor, I'm going to give you the chair for a second so I can make a comment or two. I guess before I make comment, question to you specific, Director Valentine through Acting Deputy Mayor. There's been reference to two physical sites, but for 25 years on the east side of town, there has been a property advertised as future development for the Collingwood Golf Course. So are we talking about all lands that are zoned? Not just the two that are currently in that particular use.
Director Valentine?
Thank you, Madam Acting Chair. I'm not sure what to call you. I'm so sorry, but really, honestly, it was intended. What this comment was intended to capture is underutilized lands within our settlement area boundaries that are not currently designated or zoned for residential development, but could be more appropriate in the future should business circumstances arise, rather than expanding our greenfield area out into important agricultural lands or rural lands. So that was the flavor of the comment. And as I hear the conversation evolve, I wonder perhaps if all of the examples should just be deleted and replaced by having a conversation about underutilized properties and not pointing at any specific use, as that appears to be causing some challenges in terms of the clarity of the comment.
Thank you, Director Valentine. Acting Mayor Hall.
Thank you, Director Valentine. I actually kind of like that suggestion because although in the micro context, if something was presented today, I would be generally supportive of denying an application that would see, potential green lands, regardless of use, converted to some type of housing, if that housing could be supported and developed elsewhere. But in the true sense of being a politician, I also agree with Councillor Madigan in the context that these are privately owned lands. And I'm hesitant to put any definition on someone's private land today when the change in use or opportunity for further conversation could be years out. I do say that being very mindful to the fact that we do know, and it's not a secret. I mean, there was written correspondence that came in through the official plan process from the owner of the one property in particular, that they were reserving their right to potentially make a use or a change in use for that specific property, in part or in whole. I'm adding the in whole because I'm not sure, but So I'm asked to remove myself from the chair just to elaborate on the comment, because I am, quite frankly, really struggling with the fact that I take issue in terms of pigeonholing one particular use when, yes, there are examples, and we've seen examples within other areas, but even within our own community. I mean, Lockhart Road at one point was a 9-hole golf course or thereabouts. And it's an industry that does ebb and flow. And as I said, I think if an applicant was before us today looking to change the use, I would be very hesitant to support if it wasn't some type of maintaining of the green space for public access or public use. But at the same time, it is a private property and it is a private ownership right. And I'm not particularly comfortable in using any type of language that might might prevent an owner their fundamental property rights. That's it.
Okay. So I think we ask for any other, I think everyone's commented at least twice, which is our procedural bylaw. So I think we will call a question.
I'll take-
And I will hand
excuse me,
I will hand the chair back to the chair.
Thank you. I do know that Councillor Hamlin, you wanted to make comment before I did, so please go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on the suggestion that Director Valentine had that we eliminate the identified uses, and I do think this is a better approach, and instead say the underutilized lands, or however would fit best into that. I don't see that this is a question of trying to direct private owners of land in their future business dealings at all. The purpose of this provision, as I understand it, is to say, hey, golf courses and other similar kind of underutilized lands, we should be red flagging them for further discussion. And I don't want golf courses in that list specific, or, I'm, as I say, happy to take them all out, because it's a matter of where the golf course is. If the golf course is in the middle of an urban area, it will be considered underutilized because it doesn't have houses on it. Okay. So, but we're not quite there yet. And I don't want to red flag it and say, hey, these are going to be underutilized at one day. There's examples all over the province. Golf courses, are falling like pins. But we don't need to encourage the discussion until it becomes underutilized. So as I say, just to go back, I would like to change what I'm requesting to delete the examples and just make reference to underutilized lands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You were the seconder. Are you okay with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So with that, I think it's fairly clear then. We're going with the terminology as an amendment to the word underutilized. Underutilized. So I will call the question. Those in the affirmative? That is unanimous. Thank you. So then I'll bring it back to the main motion with the two amendments, and I still have Councillor Madigan and Berman as my mover and seconder. So then if there is no further discussion, I will call the question on the further that as amended. Those in the affirmative. That's carried unanimously. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, did we need a further motion to approve this going ahead, subject to any further comments that council may decide they have after the submission?
If you would like to put that on the table,
I would.
it was certainly mentioned.
Yep.
So, okay. Can I get a seconder? Acting Deputy Mayor. Everyone understand what's being requested? I will call the question. Those in the affirmative? Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Item 6 then, departmental updates. We have 3, potentially 2 if the one is deferred. So let's go with 6.1. And Director Valentine, you're up again with any OLT updates. Appeal
Thank you.
updates.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have a short update for you today on 2 fronts from the OLT appeal perspective. Firstly, stemming from our last update to this committee, where committee members requested that all publicly available documents from a background perspective be posted online for the Huntingwood Trails West as well as Bridgewater appeals. I just wanted to bring everyone up to date that staff has actioned that request. And for Huntingwood, we now have all of the documents posted, as well as a backgrounder to assist members of the public in understanding the history of that particular development. And we are currently working on doing the same for the Bridgewater materials. Should any member of the public need some assistance in accessing where those documents are posted on our website, it is part of our major development map. But if you're unable to find that, certainly reach out to any member of the planning team and we'd be happy to connect you with those recently posted documents. The second update we have for you is we have received another appeal. It is an appeal of a non-decision for a concurrent plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment, and that would be for the next Eden Oak development, which is located at 452 Raglan Street. This is a slightly more unusual circumstance where we were just wrapping up the peer review process of the background documentation, and we're prepped to move towards a public meeting when the appeal was launched by the applicant based on their ability to do so under the Planning Act. So in fact, this appeal has been launched before we had an opportunity to move into the public consultation stage of these 2 particular applications. So this is unusual and I would venture to say unfortunate, but it is permitted under the Planning Act, and staff will take the next steps in accordance with our OLT process that was approved by council in preparing a background report for council's direction on this appeal, which will come to you in camera and where we can seek direction on next steps. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That wraps up the 2 updates that we have for you this evening.
Great, thank you. Just for public reference, 452 Raglan's on the east side of the Prairie River and is not directly off Raglan, but the axis is off Raglan, but it's actually a parcel that's set back off of Raglan.
Sorry, was that a question, Mr. Chair?
I just, for clarification, that the location, that's correct?
Yes, that's correct. There is a small frontage on Raglan Street, and that's where the address comes from, but the primary access does come from the north and not from Raglan Street from this particular plan of subdivision.
Thank you. Councillor Carrier?
Thank you. Through you to the Director of Planning, there was an article on CBC News site on the weekend, July 3rd, posted about residents in Collingwood opposed to planned developments on wetland. One of them is the Huntingwood Trail. I think that's correct. It's referenced in there. There's a 12-day OMB hearing coming up, and there's like 100 units or something. I thought that one was already settled, and that there's an appeal on the one side of the property, but the other one was already an OLT. I just thinking that the story was incorrect in the facts, and I just thought maybe we should make a statement or somehow respond that if it is an error, that there is a factual error in the story. I'm assuming has staff not seen it, because I can forward it to them.
Was the article that you're referring to from the CBC or the Toronto Star? Okay. So there is another one from the Star as well, or at least there's been contact from the Star, and a statement has been prepared and sent to the Toronto Star. But to your question, Director Valentine, do you have a comment to clarify?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we certainly have seen, I believe it was the CBC article as well. There is an outstanding appeal on the Huntingwood Westlands, as they're known, for approximately a plan of subdivision for approximately 100 additional dwelling units. So that part of the article is correct. There is a hearing scheduled in August, and this appeal has come before council a few times in camera, but perhaps not during Councillor Carrier's tenure, most recent tenure.
Yeah. Thank you, and I apologize if I misspoke on the facts. Thank you.
Any more questions specific to the OLT appeal updates? Okay. Yes, Director, or Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I just am compelled to express a little bit of frustration that our staff are working in good faith with these developers, and they are forcing our hand into the Ontario Land Tribunal at the expense of our residents and their tax dollars. And it seems to me that in general, our planning departments across the province are being blamed for the increasing cost of housing, and yet it's actions like these that will also delay a project and indirectly impact on the affordability of the housing that will be built.
That was just a comment statement, correct?
Just a comment.
Okay. Then we will look to move to 6.2, and I'll just ask the CAO, are you looking to defer this item? And maybe you
Yes.
could just a brief comment as to the rationale, please.
Sure. Thank you. Through the chair, we've recently, through some good hard work from staff and our consultant, received the facility assessments report. And I just wanted to make sure it was ready to come before the public. There's a number of comments around the condition, and I'd like to get some more information about how that will ultimately impact our non-core assets and how that fits within the core assets information you've already received. So we're targeting September, largely because the August agenda is quite full, and you don't need to make a specific decision on this non-core asset item in the next couple of months. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moving then to 6.3, lame duck update. And looking at the slide deck, this is not an update. This is a full-blown presentation. So you're on deck. Go ahead, Councillor.
I'll be very, very quick.
No, please take your
I
time.
was not
This is very
anticipating the
important.
planning discussion to go that long, but I should know better by now. So the format of this presentation, it was quite timely, through your worship, to members of the standing committee, that we did a lunch and learn with staff regarding what exactly lame duck is. There is miscommunication out there with respect to what can and can't be done. So we're going to give a quick overview of what that looks like and means for council, for staff, and for the public as we move forward before we get to nomination day. So a quick overview, we're going to do the understanding of the status, restrictions when in lame duck, delegated authority and other tools, and Collingwood specific projects that we're going to touch on so that you're aware. Understanding lame duck status, touching on what the legislative framework is, how lame duck status is determined, and what does lame duck status, when does it come into effect? And we regularly use the word lame duck status, but it truly is, it came forward as the restricted acts after nomination day, but is commonly referred to as lame duck. So next slide. Next slide. So this legislative framework, the Municipal Act does set out actions that council is not able to act after nomination day, depending on how many members are intended to run for council. The main purpose of having lame duck provisions is to prevent council from operating in a manner that would unduly disadvantage the incoming council. And a liability, as we're going to get into, is the act is interpreted as a financial liability, not a legal liability, such as an unbudgeted expense or an immediate pecuniary liability. Next slide. So the lame duck status regarding this legislative framework has 4 basic restrictions. So the appointment or removal from office, any officer of the municipality, the hiring or dismissal of an employee, the disposition of real or personal property of the municipality that exceeds 50,000 at the time of the disposal, and making any expenditure or incurring any liability, again, referencing financial, which exceeds the $50,000. There are some exceptions. This $50,000 limit does not apply if the disposition or liability was included in the most recent budget adopted by council before nomination day in the election or during an emergency situation. So our next slide, how is lame duck determined? To avoid, so when there is a potential that the new council may be composed of less than 3/4 of the members of the outgoing council. And so for council, this means for Collingwood that if less than 7 members of the current council do not seek re-election, or it can be determined with certainty that 7 or fewer members will be re-elected to council, then lame duck becomes into effect. With the mayor's seat being declared vacant on June 20th and the acting mayor, Hall, being appointed mayor effective July 27th, council will consist of 9 members of council for calculation purposes, regardless if we continue with a vacant seat. So it still remains at that 9 members of council. One item, too, that we have to take in consideration when lame duck is determined is if we do have members of council that are vying for this same position. So we know for certainty that only one of those members of council can get in. It can be even determined we have 7 councillor seats. So if there's 8 members that run for council, we know that only 7 can get in. We're currently in that situation with this council because we have 2 councillors nominated for the position of mayor. Mind you, nomination day, I will get into on our very next slide. So if we want to flip to the next slide. So council can become lame duck on one or both of these 2 different dates. So nomination day is August the 19th. And so August 19th at 2 p.m. is the last day to file for nominations for the municipal and school board elections. So lame duck can become effective on this date. Also, it could become effective on election day to the end of the current term of council. Again, if the 3/4 of the existing council is not reelected. And again, myself as clerk, I'm responsible to undertake those calculations following the nomination deadline and the election day final post of results. Next slide. Restricted acts in lame duck. So again, we briefly touched on the hiring and dismissal of staff. The disposition of property over $50,000 and unbudgeted expenditures or liabilities over $50,000. An officer is a position required by the Municipal Act and or other such act and can include any appointment of a position that must be made by bylaw. This could include the CBO, the fire chief, an MLEO, a clerk, a treasurer, or CAO. In lame duck, an officer cannot be hired or dismissed beginning nomination day to November 15th. So in the case of 2022, it's November 15th. Hiring or dismissal of an officer cannot be delegated to a CAO. However, the hiring or dismissal of employees may continue because it's permissible under existing HR policies and is not within the purview of the council decision-making policies. What can continue during lame duck? Any new expenses under the $50,000 threshold and expenditures that were included in the budget prior to August the 19th that were over the $50,000 mark. Next slide. delegated authority and other tools. Council may delegate to take action on restrictions as long as the delegation is passed by council prior to nomination day, which is August 19th. In November 22nd, 2021, council did delegate the following authority to the CAO in the event of lame duck status coming into effect: the hiring or dismissal of any employee of the municipality, with the exception of officers required by the Act, the disposition or purchase of any real or personal property from the municipality, and making any expenditure or incurring any other liability deemed necessary for the continuous operation and provision of services to the residents of the municipality, including the executing of documents deemed necessary to ensure residents are well served. The CAO is required to report back on all uses of delegated authority and will be applying a high level of discretion when asked to apply her delegated authority. As noted during that approval last November, any delegated authority related to an execution of a significant contract requires review with our solicitor, and any financial matters are to the satisfaction of the town treasurer. Next slide. I provided a couple examples here of possible delegated authority. So time-limited settlement or litigation or potential litigation, unbudgeted land acquisition that exceeds $50,000, adjustments of funding sources or interim project funding, and some of these other items that I previously just touched upon as well. We'll go to emergencies on our next slide. What happens is there is an emergency when council is in lame duck. Actions required to address this emergency would be taken. Lame duck restrictions would not apply, and no delegated authority is required. Collingwood specific projects. If we go to our next slide, and we'll get right into the projects themselves. On our next slide. So I just wanted to reference this piece as well, because we did have a legal review with our municipal solicitors regarding this financial component to liability. So liability in the Act is interpreted as a financial liability, not a legal liability. So again, an unbudgeted expense, immediate pecuniary liability, or general risk of something being appealed or litigated, that does not trigger this clause. And looking at our specific examples, the Collingwood grain terminals. So we are anticipating a decision from council on August the 18th, 2022, to award the contract to the successful bidder. This does not trigger a financial commitment at this time. However, it is a significant decision of the municipality that we are requiring council's approval and is consistent with our procurement bylaw. Following the award, negotiations with a successful proponent will be underway, including preparation of a memorandum of understanding and planning applications that are required. Any financial commitments wouldn't be considered until the 2023 budget at the earliest. The next item is the official plan update. The draft official plan is going to be presented as discussed this evening on July the 11th at a special meeting of council. The statutory requirements for the adoption of official plans, such as the holding of public meetings, passing of a bylaw, and requesting approval by council, are not restricted acts. Other municipalities are also in the same situation as us in adopting or refreshing official plans during this period. And again, our legal opinion said that there is no immediate financial liability and not any potential costs, and the costs related to possible appeals don't fall within this restricted act. Our next slide addresses questions we received about the ministerial zoning order request by Live, Work, Learn, Play, governed by Section 47 of the Planning Act, and permits the minister to directly govern land uses with a subject area, superseding the standard land use planning process. No statutory requirement / process to request an MZO, but generally local council resolutions of endorsement are preferred by the ministry in addition to the MZO request from the proponent. The legal opinion confirmed that lame duck does not apply, as this is effectively a decision of the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and not a decision of this council. Our next slide addresses the Icbl exemptions. There are no restrictions on council's ability to pass bylaws. Exemptions to the Icbl may be considered and passed during the lame duck period. Again, the legal opinion confirmed liability under the Act refers to immediate financial liability and not a potential cost from possible future appeals. Our next slide is regarding the water treatment plant expansion. So all budget matters associated with the water treatment plant may proceed. However, we may require CAO's delegated authority to approve any adjustments over the $50,000. And I don't believe any are expected at this time. If they do come up, again, requires a notice from the CAO to council and the community regarding the use of any such delegated authority. Next slide. Other planning applications. There are no Planning Act related lame duck restrictions within the Municipal Act or Planning Act unless an agreement requiring town contribution of funds over $50,000. Example could be a development of a park at the cost of the town. Again, we received a legal opinion confirming that planning applications can continue as normal as they generally do not incur an immediate liability or an expenditure. And we have next slide. Quick takeaways, and I think I've touched on this about the liability issues. All major projects of the town may proceed as normal, but staff should keep in mind any additional expenditures that may be required. And this is what was communicated to during a recent town lunch and learn session that we had with all of our staff. Planning processes may continue as normal, but keep in mind any town contributions of funds, and that there is not much time to bring any matters before standing committees and council prior to lame duck status taking effect. So staff have been advised to appropriately plan. And basically, this has been in the back of everyone's mind since early this year. And we have, I think, appropriately planned. We do have one round of standing committees left in August. We have a standing committee set up depending on the needs for any important matters that need to be considered before August the 19th. And so we have set it up that there is a potential of the three standing committees. So there could be a combination of SIC, DNO, and CCS on that 8th. We will know a little bit further. It looks at this moment that we potentially would just have two, but council and the public will be notified during the normal notice provisions of our agenda. Next slide. And any questions can be directed to clerk services, to either myself or Deputy Clerk Dahl. And then there's one last slide, because I would really like to thank our coordinator of clerk services for putting this presentation together. And he thought that this was appropriate for our discussion today.
Thank you, Clerk Almas. Does anyone from around the table have any questions of clarity to ask our clerk? Okay. So we have two items left then in our agenda. We've got other business, and then we've got public delegations. So I'm going to move to item 7, and this is a housekeeping item from a previous SIC meeting on June the 13th, I believe. And I'll put this back on the floor, or I'll put it on the floor, I should say. The items is specific to CAO 2022-09 Interim Control Bylaw number 2021-024 Exemption Request Short-Term Exemption Program Intake number 1. And recommendation was deferred from the 20th, so I was wrong on the date, June of 2022. And the matter at hand was that 80 Madeline Drive be exempt from the provisions of the Interim Control Bylaw number 2021-024 and added to the bylaw Schedule A for the purposes and uses outlined in this report. And of course, the report has already been identified as CAO 2022-09 Icbl Short-Term Exemption Program Intake 1. This was part of the list of properties that had been identified by staff for exemption in Intake 1. And after deputation from one gentleman and a request from council, we deferred this. So, yes, Councillor Doherty.
My apologies, Chair. I have previously declared a non-disqualifying conflict or interest in this matter as I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Blue Mountain Watershed Trust Foundation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. CAO Skinner, I'm viewing this as a housekeeping item. The question was fairly clear on what we were looking to have answered. I'm assuming it has been answered, but if you could offer comment, or Director Valentine.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report has an additional amendment. It's unusual. We're back with 2 amendments, so it is set out there for members. The requested due diligence has been delivered, and I know that Director Valentine is available for any questions if there are some, but I think what Council has asked for has been followed up on and is noted there with the recommendation to provide the exemption for this final property outstanding from intake number 1.
Okay, thank you. So I put it on the floor, but if I could get a mover and seconder. I've got Councillor Berman and Councillor Madigan. Are there any questions specific to the item for staff? Okay, I'll call the question then. Those in the affirmative, and that's carried unanimously. Thank you. That then takes us to public delegations, and I'll open it up to the gallery or online for anyone who wishes to speak to a matter before us tonight. Okay. Welcome, Mr. Fryer. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay. Tim Fryer, 75 Georgian Manor Drive. Acting Mayor Hall and members of council, I appreciate the opportunity to address you. At the last SIC, request was made that the further 2021 financial review expected for today include more detail on municipal water. Hopefully that is the case, and I can appreciate that it would be a part of the reason why it would not come to the table until August. Certainly not going into detail right now with the delay, at least regarding municipal financial position, but will on related tax and utility charge concerns. It needs to occur now due to timeline difficulties, especially on EPCOR's early cost of service rate filing. This is one of the matters that I, as noted numerous times during council's process to deal with the seat vacancies, I would prefer to have been a council member while EPCOR was moving ahead with their plans over the past months. I believed and still do that it would have been of assistance to you and more importantly to your electricity ratepayers. Also reflecting back on my request that the Community Liaison Committee be accessible to the public, that process surely could have been the best approach to use. Now though, with EPCOR having filed application and being directed by the OEB to notify their customers of a significant rate increase request, one of the due diligence concerns I have consistently raised in the past is being addressed generally after the fact. That is the crux of why this needs to be brought forward today. Since a number of aspects of the premature rate filing are not what was anticipated by 2014 to 18 council, certainly not to me as a member back then. It is incumbent that the council consider taking appropriate next steps. I would submit that the problem is that the Community Liaison Committee has functioned privately. For a member of the public, the assumption is that council has already approved of EPCOR's filing for increased rates in 2023, even though the understanding at closing of the sale was that 2024 would be the earliest. Correctly, the CLC was formed with a purpose that important aspects, like the former level of ratepayer engagement, would continue after the sale to EPCOR. Respectfully, I would submit that goal of council has not been met, especially when you consider that another integral anticipated benefit that prompted sale was delivery charge stability. Instead, ratepayers are first finding out of the unexpected 10% increase in their delivery charge from an OEB notification broadcast. Yes, as the OEB notice indicates, the extensive filing information is available on the website for public access, but there are hundreds, probably thousands of pages of material. So realistically, very difficult for other ratepayers to do an initial review to find the major contributing factors concerning the high level of increase. Time only allows for a brief outline, right now, but I can highlight concerns that council may also already be aware of. First, EPCOR is just one of 2 or 3 Ontario LDCs filing a cost of service for 2023 rate increases. COVID recovery impacts for customers and cost fluctuations over the past couple of years have been cited as reasons for others delaying. The business plan info used in 2018 OEB approval of sale process indicated that total operating costs would be $5.3 million in 2023. So 10% less than if status quo had been maintained. But $6.5 million has been applied for, which is instead 10% higher than without a sale. Administration cost escalation alone, due in part to the elimination of shared services with the Collingwood Public Utility Services Board, is the major reason for the $1.2 million additional cost recovery request. Third, capital investment required by EPCOR to the system did as expected, doubling in cost to $5 million annually. That greater than $20 million cost confirms finance's position that was raised when council took a $6 million dividend and replaced it with debt in 2012. If sale to EPCOR did not close, the partners would have had put significant investment back into their LDC in order to maintain the returns. If council isn't aware of these factors and already approved of them, then I would respectfully request an understanding of whether there are plans to discuss such things as these with EPCOR in the near future. I would submit at a minimum a request should be made to delay until 2024 any approved rate increases to conform to the terms of the 2018 sales agreement. Otherwise, electricity rates could go the way of the municipal taxes in regards to comparing to our neighboring community. Currently, Wasaga Electric ratepayer delivery charges are 2% lower. The proposed new rates would lift the difference to double digits. Not quite as high as the 20% difference in municipal mill rate, but still very significant. And relief surely would be appreciated. In closing then, as always, I can discuss or clarify on any of the information I've provided. And again, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Fryer. Anyone around the table have a question for clarification, comment? Councillor Doherty?
Thank you, through you to Mr. Fryer. Is it guaranteed that should an LDC make application to the OEB that they would in fact be successful in their requested rate increase?
Respectfully, I don't think I can answer that. I don't know the application itself, how thorough it is, and that's required. You have to have thorough evidence to be submitted to justify your increases. So I can't comment on what the OEB would do.
Sorry, can I just interject? CEO Skinner, did you want to comment?
Thank you. There was just a couple of things that I thought were relevant to put forward. One is that the EPCOR did not seek nor has not had council approval or any engagement with council on this submission. It's a private business that is submitting to their regulator around what they think their costs need to be in the future moving forward. We do have some conversations at the liaison committee. The liaison committee has a 2-year mandate, which is now expired. And we're looking at whether that should continue and to have a conversation with council around that. The liaison committee is very much about community collaboration and who's raising money for what charities and those kind of things where we could work together maybe to look at the locations for EV chargers and the like. We've not talked contract administration at that forum, and it's not intended to be for contract administration. You have mentioned some, the speaker, Mr. Fryer, had mentioned some comments around what was in the contract itself, and I will go back and refresh ourselves around the sale contract just to see if there was anything in there that we should be watching more closely, and if so, we will do so from the staff perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty, did you have a second question or comment?
Actually, the CAO has summarized the balance of what I wanted to have communicated very well. So that's it. Thank you.
Can I
Yeah, please
respond
go
to
ahead.
that? Thank you.
Yeah.
And again, respectfully, the CLC was formed, in my opinion, because there was a sales agreement, and there were terms about that sales agreement that were hopefully going to transpire the way we would want them to. So my understanding when I was on council and we requested that would be formed was that it would serve that purpose. It would take us through those stages of things like that very first rate application, which this is what we're talking about right now, and it conforming to what the agreement said. So I respectfully, again, that was my understanding of how the CLC was supposed to liaise.
Okay. I personally don't have comment or answer. I am going to maybe refer the matter if that could be brought back, though, for comment specific to that second question, unless you wish to make a comment tonight. And the comment quite simply could be to come back.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to paraphrase, if I could, the mandate of the Municipal Advisory Committee in their terms of reference briefly, and then if there's anything else we could come back. But while we're all here, it's a nonpartisan, apolitical group, and the mandate is to bring together a group of individuals representing the viewpoints of the town, and provide input, to receive information and provide input regarding emerging issues in the electrical utility industry and potential impacts on the community, customers, and environment. And there's 3 representatives from EPCOR and 3 from the town that talk through items. And typically, one of the members of the group, the advisory committee, it has been Councillor Doherty a number of times, will paraphrase any of the discussions in one of our committee meetings following each meeting, which have been spaced at 3 or 4 months apart typically. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I agree fully with what CEO Skinner said. That's what an advisory committee is according to procedural bylaws doing. But that's not my understanding, and I've said this a number of times over the years about the CLC. I was adamant in my position as a councillor when we were going through the sales agreement, because the terms of that sales agreement that I've touched on here were important to me, because again, I wanted rate stability, and it appeared like we were actually looking at rate decreases instead of increases. So as I said, I've presented to council numerous times through the last 3 years regarding the CLC, and I agree with what CEO Skinner's outlined, is that's how an advisory committee is formed by the council, and that's what they do, and that's what you've chosen to do.
Any other questions, comments? Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Fryer. And Clerk Almost will just double check anyone else online. Okay. So with that, I will close our public delegation, and I will look down the right-hand side to Councillor Jeffrey for a notice to adjourn. Those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Great. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.